Do you want to know what 100 years looks like? It looks like this. A grandparent behind the wheel of a car that probably cost less than today's cell phone. A teenager seeing the world that generations of his community helped build, rolling back in time down Olympic Avenue. These aren't just old cars. They are proof that some things are built to last. And so is this town. And if the Olympic Mountains or the Stillaguamish River could talk, they would tell the story of a scrappy timber town that weathered war, hardship, and change without ever losing its sense of community. The valley's history is less a march of events than a collection of deeply human moments that together add up to something remarkable. By 1910, the town of Arlington had already reinvented itself once. Two remote frontier villages, Haller City and Arlington, had merged into a single thriving community, incorporated just 7 years earlier. It was a town that advanced steadily in modern amenities, running water, electric streetlights, and telephone lines humming with conversation. There was lots to talk about. 7 churches, 3 schools, and 1 very busy bank. The Arlington State Bank, founded in 1900, had outgrown its original home and moved into a stately 2-story building with iron sides and a commanding presence in about 1903 on what was then called Railroad Avenue. Inside, brass fixtures gleamed alongside a generous supply of spittoons for tobacco-chewing customers. Arlington's location at the junction of the Stillaguamish River and the railroad made it a natural center for commerce and transportation in the Stillaguamish Valley. This was a timber town through and through. Men worked 6 days a week, 10 or more hours a day, in the relentless rhythm of logging camps and shingle mills. And on Saturday nights, they poured off the trains and straight into Arlington's 11 saloons. By April 1910, the town had seen enough. A new ordinance forced the saloons to close at midnight and stay shut all of Sunday. The wild nights grew a little quieter. A little. Arlington's fire department, that was formed in 1903, had a band of devoted volunteers. Guided by the urgent clang of bells, they dashed through town, dragging a heavy hose cart. Sometimes, the flames had already destroyed the building. All of the hungry loggers and mill workers needed to eat, and so local farms rose to the occasion. Dairy farmers drove fresh milk cream in horse-drawn wagons to the Arlington Creamery, established in 1901, which churned out butter for the whole valley. A town this busy needed medical care. Dr. William F. Oliver served the valley for 37 years, helping nearly 1,500 babies take their first breath. His home on the Cloud Avenue was described as a kind of museum, its walls bright with colorful paintings by his wife, Lillian. Out on the roads between homes, he relied on Rosamond Sporhas, a trusted nurse and midwife, to make the rounds while he was elsewhere. Together, they were the medical heartbeat of a scattered rural community. By 1910, Arlington had 2 private hospitals. Dr. E. Martin Adams and his wife, Carrie, opened a hospital in 1907 on the 2nd floor of their home at 327 North McLeod Avenue. When H.A. Moll bought the property in 1927, the building was converted into a funeral home, its current use. Change was coming, and it had 4 wheels. When John Ellingson and his wife rolled into town in 1906 with the first motor car anyone had ever seen here, heads turned. Conversations stopped, and children chased it down the street. By 1912, Arlington men were behind the wheel of EMF tourers, steering from the right side. Locals like to joke that EMF stood for Every Morning Fix 'em. The logging town was building its future in stone and mortar. In 1907, construction began on the first masonry buildings along the main street. the Pautsky Building, and Citizens State Bank, sharing a sturdy 50-foot wall and the same builder. When Arlington High School opened its doors on September 7, 1908, it became the town's second masonry building and its most prominent. 56 eager students arrived that first morning on horse-drawn school buses.
The kids out in the country wouldn't be able to get here. And so they had to start with 5 wagons. They were high-wheeled wooden wagons with 4 corner posts and supported a canopy to keep the rain off. They were pulled with 2 horses. Some of them were driven by women. They had various degrees of pay depending on the distance of the run. The Savannah run was $3.50, and the Trafton run was maybe a little bit more. And eventually, when Oso got in on it, that was 14 miles out, they got $5 a day for transporting kids to school. Now, we look at that time, they started with 7 school buses in 1920 that were then, it was switched over. They got rid of the individual owners owning them, and the district took it on. And by that time, they had 7, and today we have 52 school buses. Some of them carry 80 passengers, and some of the old buses and the wagons were 12 maximum.
In June 1909, the town council passed Ordinance Number 95. From then on, every new building on the main street had to be built with fireproof masonry. The era of wooden storefronts were over, at least for a while, until the ordinance was repealed. Most of those buildings are still standing today, their brick walls outlasting the businesses, the names, and the stories contained inside them. A walk down Olympic Avenue on a spring afternoon is walking through a century of ambition. Back in 1910, Arlington buzzed with rivalry as 2 private telephone companies vied for customers, each operating on separate, unconnected systems. Local merchants grumbled about the hassle of juggling 2 phone services and renting twice as much equipment just to reach all their customers. In January 1911, the Arlington Pavilion opened, and it was a lively hub for dancing, roller skating, and community gatherings. In April 1917, a graceful fountain appeared at Union Circle, where Olympic Avenue meets Division Street, adding the kind of small-town beauty that makes a place feel like home, and a place for horses and cattle to drink. In 1913, Snohomish County revamped the Haller Bridge approaches, paving the way for the age of automobiles. At the top of the bridge, a stern sign warned, "Notice, $10 fine for riding or driving on this bridge faster than a walk." In 1914, war broke out across Europe. To most people in Arlington, it felt impossibly far away. 5,000 miles and an ocean between them and the trenches. Arlington's hardships were more tangible and visible. In January 1916, fire consumed the Oddfellows Opera House at the corner of Olympic and First Street. It was gone in a night, erased from the town's landscape forever. And then came the snow. On January 31st, 1916, a storm swept in that locals would talk about for decades. By February 2nd, the snow stood 42 inches deep. Roofs buckled and barns collapsed, trapping livestock beneath the heavy white drifts. More hardship ensued, and the people persevered through what was known simply thereafter as the Big Snow of 1916. When the United States entered World War I in April 1917, Arlington's timber industry became suddenly vital. The demand for lumber to fuel the war effort was insatiable. That same spring, the industrial workers of the world, the Wobblies, held their first Arlington meeting. They called for safer conditions and an 8-hour workday. By September, after a strike that froze nearly 80% of production, the Wobblies won. Many of the men on those picket lines soon traded their axes for army rifles as the demands of war raged on. On April 11, 1918, Arlington threw a parade unlike anything the Valley had ever seen. A convoy of 102 carloads arrived from Everett alone. In a town of 1,400, more than 2,000 marchers waved flags down the main street, cheered on by 4,000 spirited spectators. As night fell, the celebration moved to what is now Legion Park. Massive stumps fed a roaring bonfire. The crowd burned in effigy of the German Kaiser, the firelight dancing across faces flushed with patriotism and grief. They knew war was no parade. In France, Private Joseph E. Brousseth and 3 other soldiers set out on a reconnaissance mission up La Chaîne Tendue Ridge, a towering stronghold in the Argonne, fiercely defended by German forces. 5 minutes later, they disappeared into the mist, and gunfire shattered the silence. Private Brousseth fell on October 4th, 1918. He was buried close to where he fell, his identification tags hanging on a wooden cross. Today, his name is etched on a plaque outside Arlington City Hall, originally known as the Municipal Building. One of 8 local men who gave their lives in the World War, prematurely called the War to End All Wars. In 1918, before the fighting even ended, the town endured a new wave of disease. An influenza pandemic swept the globe, afflicting even the young and healthy. Streets fell silent, and public gatherings vanished. In Arlington, a bell ringing at 4 from the town hall offered the only hopeful message parents could hold on to, that school would be open tomorrow. Disease and the effects of war continued. Weeks after the armistice, Red Cross nurse Emma Thorson, born locally where the Pilchuck Creek met the river, died of influenza on November 24, 1918 at Camp Dodge, Iowa, while caring for soldiers. She was still tending to others when the war caught up with her. The guns fell silent on November 11th. The grief, as always, took much longer. The war was over. A sense of renewal spread, and people wanted to put it behind them, build new lives, chase new dreams, and maybe have a little fun in between work. Arlington's band entertained and delighted crowds at events throughout the year, especially when marching in parades. In 1920, dairy farmers formed the Snohomish County Dairymen's Association and took over the Arlington Condensery, which soon shipped canned and powdered milk around the world. Meanwhile, Charlie and Louise Rage, along with their son, John Rage, developed Valley Gem Farms just west of today's Highway 9, a local legend known for its Valley Gem potatoes, prized Guernsey cows, and the daily ritual of fresh, pasteurized milk deliveries across town. In the early days, whole milk was delivered daily to downtown businesses in a wheelbarrow. The Valley's dairy herds needed tending, and for 37 years, beginning around 1918, Dr. Gustav Unrau worked tirelessly and with style. He made barn calls in a suit and tie, even when delivering a newborn calf, and kept a parrot in his office lobby at 122 East Maple Street that greeted visitors by screeching, "Throw the bum out, Doc!" His real passion, though, was raising champion English bulldogs. On January 17, 1920, America went dry. The 18th Amendment slammed the door on alcohol, and in Arlington, the divide between the dries and the wets ran so deep that neighbors who disagreed simply stopped speaking to each other. Out in the countryside, bootleggers got creative. Secret stills were tucked away in barns, root cellars, and the backs of fields, transforming mash into moonshine while revenue agents searched for the culprits. Meanwhile, the community was investing in its children. In 1921, Roosevelt School opened on French Avenue, bringing a new model of education to Arlington. Teachers who could focus on 1 or 2 grade levels rather than juggling all 8 in a single room. Today, that building is home to the Arlington School District Administration. The community also needed a meeting space. In 1923, Pioneer Hall was built from sturdy cedar logs at what is now the Stillaguamish Valley Museum. The following year, the community gathered for a lively picnic to celebrate the new hall, with Chief William Shelton, his wife, and his daughter from the Tulalip tribe as honored guests. That same year, in 1923, in a burst of civic creativity, Arlington opened a zoo at Terrace Park. The collection was eclectic. 1 kangaroo, a pair of cub bears, several pheasants and hawks of various nationalities, Himalayan rabbits, white rats, white mice, an English pigeon, 2 raccoons, a buck deer, and, on loan from the county game farm, a silver hawk with a tail feather nearly 3 feet long. The zookeeper asked visitors not to feed the bears meat, as it would make them savage. After 5 months, the bears were released. The zoo closed in 1927 for lack of funds, and the animals were sent to Forest Park in Everett, including the kangaroo. Another local landmark, Haller Bridge, was also at risk and had become a danger. By 1923, heavy trucks were banned from crossing, yet school buses still rumbled over its creaking planks. In 1924, the American Bridge Company arrived to rebuild it properly, along with Lincoln Bridge and the nearby railroad span. A flood during construction twisted 2 temporary columns, but thankfully, no lives were lost. Also in 1924, Dr. Oliver climbed a flight of stairs with his friend Cal Marsh, editor of the Arlington Times, and showed him the Olympic Mountains glistening white in the sun. He proposed that the main street, then still called Railroad Avenue, should reflect that view. The city council was lukewarm. Cal Marsh was not. He simply started printing Olympic Avenue in every issue of the paper. By 1926, the name had stuck. 1924 brought a different kind of glory. The Arlington Eagles captured the Washington State High School Football Championship. Earlier in the season, they beat Burlington by a score of 101-0. Some records are better left unchallenged. Development in town continued. Local builder Jens Jensen broke ground in 1924 on Arlington's handsome new 2-story concrete municipal building at the corner of Olympic and 3rd Street. He finished it in early 1925. That May, fire tore through the old wooden hall of the Ancient Order of United Workmen at the northeast corner of 3rd and Olympic Avenue. It had once been hauled half a mile by yokes of oxen from Haller City, a 2-month journey through stumps and brush. It burned in one night. The order rebuilt it with masonry, opening a new 76 by 110-foot structure in December 1926. By 1926, the Ford Motor Company added a self-starter to the Model T, and overnight, the automobile left the horse-drawn buggy behind for good. Gone were the days of cranking an engine in the cold rain. Progress, at last, involved a key. In 1927, the Arlington Fire Department rolled out its gleaming 1925 Seagrave Suburbanite fire engine, a $7,300 marvel equipped with a powerful 500-gallon-per-minute water pumper. Today, you can admire this bright red showpiece at the Stillaguamish Valley Museum. And then, almost overnight, the music stopped. When the Great Depression swept through the nation in the 1930s, the lumber demand that had built Arlington simply vanished. Mills closed. Logging camps went silent. Men who had worked their whole lives found themselves standing in bread lines. Their faith in the American dream rattled to its core. It was dairy farming that kept the valley alive. Independent milk haulers drove in from Bryant, Edgecombe, Granite Falls, Lakewood, Stanwood, and Oso to bring their loads to the condensary. For many families, that steady check from the milk cooperative was the only thing standing between them and losing the farm. At night, families gathered around their radios. President Roosevelt's fireside chats came crackling through the speaker, a calm, reassuring voice in a frightening time. Phonographs played, and people danced in their kitchens to ease the stress. The people's resilience was palpable. Arlington General Hospital closed in September 1931 after 2 years of losses. The community refused to let it stay closed, and it reopened 4 years later on July 1st, 1935. On December 5th, 1933, the nation celebrated the end of Prohibition, and so did Arlington. The saloon doors swung open once more. President Roosevelt's New Deal reached into the valley. Workers, many of them desperate for any wages at all, graded roads, improved public spaces, and channeled Snohomish County's floods into something manageable. In 1934, at the urging of the Chamber of Commerce and the Lions Club, Arlington leased 200 acres for a municipal airport. Within 6 months, workers with shovels and hoes had carved out a dusty dirt airstrip. Pilots were in the air almost immediately. But with progress came setbacks. A fire partially destroyed Arlington's first high school on July 11, 1934. It was quickly rebuilt in time for high schoolers to start on September 5, 1934. In 1936, a brand new high school went up on French Avenue. A New Deal project finished in just 11 months for about $200,000, opening on January 4, 1937. The old high school was renamed Washington School and opened that same day for 6th, 7th, and 8th graders. Around 1940, artist Richard Correll painted murals through the Federal Art Project, including Bunyan at Stillaguamish and a scene from a dairy farm. For 66 years, students filled those halls. In 1936, the Public Works Administration brought new life to Terrace Park, hiring about 20 men who were desperate for work. Plumbing lines were soon installed to a community house and to a 35 by 60-foot wading pool built 7 years earlier. But the pool had drainage problems, and the town ordered the pool filled in March 1953, ending the days of children splashing in its stagnant water. Though not a New Deal project, 1936 saw the Arlington Fire Department acquire Fire Engine No. 2, a 1936 International Class B pumper for $2,800. Today, this piece of local history stands proudly on display at the Stillaguamish Valley Museum. Through it all, Arlington kept its spirit. The 4th of July parade never stopped. Floats were simple. There was no money for elaborate decoration, but they were paraded with pride. Firefighters staged hose fights on the main street, drenching onlookers who were usually laughing and playing along. Each fall, from 1928 to 1939, the Stillaguamish Valley Fair transformed the Arlington Pavilion into a gathering place for the whole community. At the 1939 fair, the power company staged a demonstration. 58 housewives watched as a hearty meal was cooked on an electric stove for just 7 cents of electricity. Most of them still cooked with a wood stove, but they could imagine what was coming.
Some people were enticed to buy an electric stove because the electrical companies told the farmers, if you want to get power faster, we'll put your name on a different list, and if you buy electric stove. So a lot of people bought electric stoves, but a lot of them were never used.
Another bright spot was to come. On April 7, 1939, the Olympic Theater opened its doors at 107 North Olympic Avenue. For that bright moment, the town escaped the Great Depression and immersed themselves in the picture show.
Olympic Avenue has always been kind of a famous place for kids to celebrate after athletic events in particular, and on Saturday nights. Even during the war, there were only 3 policemen in Arlington. There was a day cop and then a night cop, and there was a substitute. And they were all no-nonsense people. And the kids, they would drink beer sometimes, and then they would drive by. The cops would see they had a beer or something, and they'd go after them, but they'd put water in there. Said, well, that's not beer, that's just water. And then the cops would get kind of red in the face, but then some of them would drive by and rev the engine and not have mufflers, and kids were aggravating them. And one of them in particular took off, and the police went behind him, but he was able to ditch the police out by the cemetery, and he darted in and shut the lights off, and the police went by. But the cop didn't stop. He went right to the boy's home further on and gave the dad 3 tickets of evading the police, disturbing the police. Came to $60, which was a lot of money. And he said to the dad, I know he's guilty, you know he's guilty. I'll expect to be both at the City Hall 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. And of course the kid had to go and face the music.
Hardship, opportunity, and big changes came shortly thereafter. World War II brought fear and uncertainty across the country, and Arlington felt the impacts immediately.
As it turned out, we were then first faced with blackouts right from that night, I think, because they thought there could be an invasion, and people were planned and kind of knew what to do. Committees were formed, and they started with a tower in Arlington on top of the high school, which was 3 stories high. Yeah, there was another one down in Savannah. They did have airplanes flying around here to look for people that left their lights on in the country. And if they didn't, they would have the shore patrol come out and warn them, and after 2 warnings, they could be fined. It was quite a psychological deal. My mother took my sister and I was about 5 years old, and she was 3, to the old Arlington High School to sign up for ration books. And we got 1 book for each person. There was a curfew in Arlington. The big fire bell that's out at the museum now had originally been bought in 1903 in Arlington for a fire alarm, but they reactivated it on a stand by the City Hall, and they rang it at 8 o'clock at night so that all kids had to be home. At school, when I started in 43, everything was full force. We would have bomb drills to get in the basement and go under a table. We were all issued a dog tag, not with a name on it, but a number. Always wondered about it because they were only tied with a heavy string. And I thought if we got bombed, that would burn off anyway. We never had a hot lunch program at all at that particular time, but they had scrap drives for rubber. The kids brought galoshes, tires, garden hoses. A lot of it came in on school buses. It wasn't uncommon to see a couple of tires hanging over the headlights on a bus as it came in. They had a pile for copper, brass, aluminum, steel, and cast iron.
In the summer of 1940, the Navy leased the municipal airport. Locals, including women, stepped into defense jobs or enlisted to serve. Pilots circled to 8,000 feet and practiced near-vertical dives, dropping dummy smoke bombs on targets at the south end of the field. The war reshaped Arlington, and the Puget Sound region, fueling a surge in lumber demand and drawing aircraft manufacturing to Everett. After December 7, 1941, everything moved faster. The Army Air Forces took over in April 1942. The government seized 53 properties for expansion at the airport, giving families 1 day to clear livestock, 10 days to move everything else. 6 months later, former owners received their checks. The price is set by the government with no negotiation offered. Within weeks, 2 runways appeared where fields had been. Barracks were built for 450 officers and enlisted men. In November 1942, the Navy retook control, and the Naval Auxiliary Air Station Arlington was formally dedicated on June 26, 1943. It had grown from 200 acres and a dusty dirt airstrip to 1,160 acres with 2 runways, training hundreds of Navy pilots. A 3rd runway was added in 1944. Against the backdrop of military construction and wartime duty, a young sailor named Julius Stillaguamish hitchhiked from the air station to the Arlington Pavilion one evening, skates in hand. There, he met Miss Sylvia Strotz. They married in 1944. That partnership would last 72 years. Even in wartime, the people of Arlington found ways to remind themselves of what they were fighting for. Builder Jens Jensen crafted a memorial in Legion Memorial Park, dedicated on July 4, 1944. It stands there still, a quiet reminder of the lives sacrificed. On September 2, 1945, World War II was over. The Arlington Condensery shipped evaporated and condensed milk across the seas to the Orient and to war-torn Europe. Many of the farms that had been thriving in 1910 were still producing and feeding the world.
If I had to think of one person that had maybe a larger impact on our community than any other, it might be George Murphy.
George Murphy arrived in Arlington with his trade and the tools he could push on a 2-wheeled cart. He built a slaughterhouse near the Haller Bridge, then opened a butcher shop closer to the railroad depot, placing his business at the center of a growing town.
He had the first 2 telephones in Arlington, one down at the slaughterhouse and one in Arlington. No operator. You just turned the crank until somebody answered. But that was the beginning of the telephones in Arlington.
Murphy's ambitions soon extended beyond the butcher shop. He supplied meat to the logging camps and mills that powered Arlington's early economy. Arlington had become locally known as the shingle capital of the world. During the Alaska Gold Rush, Murphy transported frozen beef to Dawson City.
And when they got there, they elected him to city council and sold it all and came back and never went back up to Dawson again. But he had enough money to get started more in business down here.
He acquired farms, built feed warehouses beside the railroad, sold farm equipment, and secured dealerships for some of Arlington's earliest automobiles. Murphy's influence was measured not only by the businesses he owned, but by the infrastructure he helped create. Elected to the Washington State Senate in 1932, he supported better transportation across the region, including access through Stevens Pass and a more direct highway between Marysville and Mount Vernon.
And so he was instrumental in getting that big 4-lane bridge built across the river down at Island Crossing in '32, right after he was elected as he started. But then there was no appropriated money to build the road to it, so it stood empty for 2 years, and they referred to it as Murphy's Folly, but it turned out to be a very wise thing that he had done.
Murphy also helped many young farmers establish lives and businesses of their own. One of them was John Cruzy, a young Dutch farm worker who hoped to marry his girlfriend, but did not yet have the money or a place for them to begin their life together.
Murphy said to Cruzy, "How much money do you need to get married?" And he said, "Well, it sounds like a lot, but almost $100. And he said, "Okay, here's the $100. You go get married, and in 1 week you report back to me, and I'll give you a farm to run with 20 cows on it."
That young man worked for Murphy for 10 years, before purchasing his own dairy. It was one example of a pattern repeated throughout Murphy's life: building businesses, strengthening the community, and helping others create futures of their own. From butcher and farmer to entrepreneur and state senator, George Murphy helped shape the Arlington that followed and left a legacy far larger than any one business or public project. A new era began with fresh energy, renewed hope, and innovation. From 1946 to 1949, the Lazy Bee Ranch, just south of the Arlington Municipal Cemetery, hosted rodeos and horse races that drew crowds of 1,700 people. It was boisterous, joyful, and deeply local. When the ranch sold in 1949, the Arlington Rodeo Days closed quietly. Entertainment continued to be brought home. In 1948, Teague's Radio and TV Shop sold its first television, a marvel with a 4x6-inch screen. Families gathered around that tiny glowing rectangle and stepped into the future. But not every pleasure came from a screen or a crowd. The Stillaguamish River ran abundant with salmon and trout in those years, a richness that is hard to imagine now. Families hunted and fished to put food on the table, and the land provided what the people put into it. Between 1910 and 1950, a mere span of 40 years, 2 world wars, a pandemic, a depression, a dairy revolution, a football championship, and even a town kangaroo, Arlington and the Stillaguamish Valley did not just survive the first half of the 20th century. They shaped it, story by story, building by building, family by family. As America marks 250 years of its own story, Arlington takes its rightful place in that national narrative as a significant chapter written in cedar logs and masonry walls, in milk and moonshine, and in the names on a memorial plaque outside the municipal building. The Stillaguamish Valley Museum preserves these stories so they are never lost, because history isn't just in textbooks. It lives here, in a bell that still rings, a fire engine still painted red, and in thousands of the museum's historic photographs. And it lives in us. May we all continue to share our stories.